episode of Reptile Fight Club. We are happy to be here this evening. Tonight it's just myself, Justin Julander, and Mr. Rob Stone. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. Excited to be here.
Yeah.
I think we still have one in the can, but it's always good to try and keep ahead of it. You know,
that's good.
With some travel and stuff going. So
yeah, I guess I just record them. I don't pay much attention to when they come out and stuff. So yeah, guess that's how it goes. Well, we get spoiled having such a great podfather in Eric. He just takes care of all that side of it. So we just have to put out the content and record something. So yeah,
absolutely.
we've been staying pretty good on it, recording shows pretty regularly. Hopefully that's appreciated, and our listeners are okay with that, with the rate they're coming out. But how's everything going with you?
It's been super busy, and will continue to be so, right? We're getting into the herping season, which is good. Super exciting.
Yeah.
Stuff in the works, short, medium, long term. So that's good. Went out this past week. So this past week was the Denver Zoo happened to be hosting the Taxon Advisory Group, the TAG meetings for stuff. So on Tuesday, I had folks over to the house to check out stuff. That was exciting, where it's, you got 7 herp keepers / curators or whatever over at the house. And
that's
feels
cool.
like you're under the microscope, but no, it seemed to go really well. Apparently they were all excited to come. And then Tom was saying they were chatting through it, or, excited, still talking about it a couple days later. So that's good.
Nice.
Take that as positive. And then on the weekend, or nearly so, we'd gotten up. The weather was terrible, but we went out. It was like that was the day that could make sense for everybody in the group. So we went out to a spot with some milk snakes and potentially hognose, but it was probably 48 degrees and cloudy.
Wow. Yeah.
And I wasn't too sanguine about our chances, but I was like, well, we're here. The old motto, you gotta try it, right? This is the time that works. They're here. It certainly wouldn't be a day I would choose just if you said, hey, you got multiple big window or whatever.
Sure.
We went up, and it's mostly flipping. So I did think there was more chance there than, for the most part, hognose you find out. So kind of basking in sunny conditions. And so I wasn't hopeful about that. I thought maybe we could flip one. But we did find 4 milks.
Wow.
And a yellow belly racer.
Nice.
And that the funny part was that first milk snake was a big, probably male, looking at condition wise and things. It was sort of an interesting look to it. It almost looked like one of the buckskin theri with that sort of brownish orange, which is not a typical look for ours. But he was actually sitting out on top of the board trying his best to catch some rays. So that was kind of wild. That was the first one, and it was like, oh, that's a surprise,
Yeah.
So,
that's awesome.
Yeah, it was really good. And I was honestly, you know the feeling, right? When you take folks out or, kind of hosting them, showing them around.
Oh,
It's like you just, as long as they don't get nothing. Yeah. Even in the conditions where you're going, inside, I'm thinking, Thursday night, should we do this? Whatever, your Friday night or whatever, should we do this? And I'm going, you're here, we're doing it, whatever. Let's give it a go, see how it happens. So, so I was super happy with that. I did one funny little side note, things that happen, especially when you're out in the country or whatever. Because we've been getting rain and it's very soft, loamy soil up there. There's some relatively steep, particularly like one-sided embankments off the road. And I turned down this small country road, and a 350, so it's got the 2 wheels on either side in the back, with a probably 20-foot flatbed pulling some heavy machinery or whatever. And I'm out there in the pickup, and I was like, okay, I got to kind of, lean over here. And so I do to make space for him. And as I do, I start tilting.
Oh, no.
And kind of, I wind up at I don't know, what would that be, a 20-degree angle, as opposed to being straight on, I'm kind of 20 degrees. And I'm like, okay, we'll see how this goes. And so I tried to sort of give it a quick acceleration back and a pull forward through this gully, situation or whatever. And to no effect. The wheels are like 8 inches deep.
Oh, shoot.
fortunately the guy, I saw him, he went by slow and had stopped, and it hadn't been even 10, 15 seconds that he had stopped and was getting the chain from the back of his
nice.
truck and pulled me out, because it was like,
kind of his fault.
I mean,
not his fault, but
not his fault, nobody's fault, or, it's just sort of like, I'm trying to do a good deed for him. And he's like, I'm not going to strand
return
you.
the favor. Yeah. That's cool.
Yeah. So we were on it, and within, under a minute, I'm back right as rain.
Oh, nice. So, that's good. That's not where you want to be, is stuck in the dirt here in the, the loose soil.
I was just looking at it like, that's pretty deep. I have to hop out of the truck, at an angle, and it's like, and by the time after I tried my little maneuver, we were probably at 30 degrees, 25, 30 degrees at that point. So,
man. Oh, that's good. Yeah. It's always nice to find some stuff. And I'm curious, like the conversation with, the professional herpetologist versus, herpetoculturalist.
Oh, it's mostly the same, to be honest with you. Yeah. I mean, I think, and maybe that's part of my whole experience has been sort of in that, in both veins, and, with the same people being involved in both veins and those sorts of things. Yeah. So no, it was super great, super casual the whole time. Just kind of, hey, these are, and especially, kind of, so Dennis McNamara, actually, who's been on the show. Was one of the folks that had come out.
Oh, cool.
And, and so all those folks are really giving him the business about, all the ball pythons and stuff.
Oh, really?
And so that was the first question to be, do you have any ball pythons? And I'm like, no, I don't. And they're like, okay, you're good. On our side with this. You're all good. So
that's funny.
So that was fun.
Oh, nice. Yeah. Dennis is a cool guy. I really like him. Yeah. He does some good stuff. So that's cool. Nice. Well, I got out last Saturday just for a bit, and Don Belknap, he's a garter snake guy down in Salt Lake area, and so he came up to do a little herping, and of course primary targets were the Amnophis, and we've got the two species up here, the wandering and the valley garters.
Okay.
Elegans and God, my brain is not functioning. Sertalis. Yeah.
Okay. So Sertalis, the valley Sertalis.
Yeah. I think there's this Fitcheye or something like that. Yeah. On it. But, cool snakes. I don't pick them up. I'm not a fan of the Schweiz smell. So Don loves it. So he was happy to pick stuff up and that kind of stuff. But I kind of just would point. I was a pointer. I was like, there's one, there's one. So yeah, but it was kind of cool. He came out with a few friends, and I believe his daughter. Yeah. And, we found probably a dozen or so garters, and both species. Nice. I think we only found one of the Sertalis, and I could only be there for a couple hours in the morning, and then had to get back. We had a Easter party down at my parents', so had to get out of there a little earlier. But they kept going, so I need to find out from him how they ended out,
how it wound up.
Yeah, so yeah, it was kind of fun, but always good to chat herps. And he had a former fish and wildlife agent, a retired fish and wildlife agent that came out and was talking about some cool stuff. And
very cool.
Nice time. But always good to get out and look for stuff and just be out in nature.
Well, and I suppose the addendum, so similar to you, so I had that aspect of where I wasn't there with them the next day. And they were running down to southern Colorado, but they'd run out to a spot, and instead of being 48 and cloudy, it was, I don't know, low to mid 70s and sunny.
Oh, yeah.
And sure enough, they actually wound up flipping a hognose, which was a little surprise. But they did get to see one, and I told them, I was like, you guys are really, and they saw prairie rattlesnakes early in the week, and it's like, hey, you guys saw the stuff that you you saw the good, the best, sort of what you can find here. Just I know. On the East Coast, right? Milk snakes are much more common. We saw in that one crack maybe more than I've combined milk snakes I've seen in my life, whatever. But they look quite different, right? They're more of
they're not quite as nice.
And that was what Keith had said. Keith had reached out separate and was like, "Man, that's really cool," And they're just so seasonal. here is
Yeah.
again kind of opposed to the East Coast. I'm sure they are with you too.
Oh yeah,
it's St. Louis here, where there's a couple brief windows in the year where you can maybe see them. And that's about it.
Yeah, and I mean, they're a flipping snake out here for the most part. I mean, you can cruise them once in a while, but yeah, you got to do a lot of flipping to find milk snakes. I think I prefer the mountain kings because you can find them out on the crawl a little easier than. But yeah, I mean, they're both beautiful for sure, and as you go east, they become much more easy to find. My friend Pat, he was Pat May. Yeah, he was headed out to Kansas, I believe. And so they did a little bit of herping in Utah. I think they said they found 1 or 2 milks in Utah, and then they found like 5 or 6 in Colorado. And then they found like 20 or 30 in Kansas. Yeah. Like they just, as they further east they went, they found more and more of the Western, milk snakes.
Yeah, the Gentilis. Yeah, I think it's that part of it is just the moisture component, right?
Sure.
Because they're a really moisture limited snake. Yeah. So that it's like, well, Utah's a little bit drier than Colorado. Kansas is much wetter than Colorado in general, right? We just talked to Dave Kelly, and I guess they've had a little bit of rough conditions for it, or I'm sure it's localized in different things or whatever. But it's like, okay, well, where you have consistent humidity, it's definitely much more common.
Yeah, Thomas Wilder's already found like a handful of mountain kings out. I mean, it helps when you live in their range, but he's finding them pretty easily already.
That's wild.
He's probably the biggest mountain king snake guy in the state, I would say. I think he's probably found more than just about anybody that I know of. I got in contact with Mark Hazel, who was he was involved with the kind of the reptile group back in 20 years ago or something, and he was going out to the lesser explored mountain ranges to try to find them out there and stuff. So it's kind of cool. I mean, it's definitely a lot harder to find them out there, and so he's found a handful in new mountain ranges, and unknown to science, I guess you would say. But yeah, so it's kind of cool to hear from him again, and here he's still out there doing it, looking for, just going out to these random mountain ranges out in the West Desert. Yeah. And I mean, it gets even harder to delineate in like Nevada and stuff like that, because there's just very little that goes on as far as looking for them out there. So a lot of things we don't know, which is kind of cool. You think, in this day and age we know everything, but it seems like sometimes that information gets lost. I think people are so tight-lipped with localities and spots, and sometimes that person takes the knowledge to their grave or whatever, but it is what it is. So
absolutely. Well, and then we got to see some cool pictures that I guess Dustin had gone twice in 3 weeks, and I think Brandon went with him either this time or both times, and so they saw some cool stuff. Not the target, but nevertheless, very cool.
Right. Yeah, I'm glad they're exploring that area. That's pretty cool. I guess it's been really dry out there, so maybe that'll help if they get a little rain or moisture out there. Yeah, that's always the trick, right? getting
the right
wet conditions.
Right balance.
Yeah, exactly. Not while you're there. You don't want it pouring on you, because you're probably not going to find much either, unless it's the first rain in a long time and they're coming out.
And then even then, maybe the next day is the day. Yeah, exactly. Or whatever.
After when it heats up again or something. But I don't know. Herping's just it's so fun. I just love it. I'm very excited for the end of May here.
I'm
head out east
too.
I saw that Stacy's been posting some photos that
oh really?
So you'll have to check that out. So she's finding one of our targets out there. So that's good. I don't know if it's in the same area we're going to be looking, but she knows how to find them. So that's good.
Yeah, well, that's even what Dan had said. He was like, this is her deal, man. You got to convince her that you guys are cool. So
nice. Yeah. Well, those guys are really cool. I'm not surprised, but like hearing about their collection and all the cool species they keep. I'm like, these are my people, my kind of people. So I'm looking forward to herping with them a bit. That'll be fun. I don't know. I've got about 8 clutches in the incubator, and So things are going pretty well. I haven't been gone as much in the egg laying season as I typically am. Yeah. It's a little better when you're home to catch the clutches, but yeah, on Tuesday night, I was, checking the females and feeding and stuff. And I lift up the hide for the inland. I've got a trio in a large cage, and here's two females kind of wrapped around each other. And it almost looked like a beehive, but they were wrapped each other. And then here's this pile of eggs sitting right next to them. Still, full and plump. The eggs look good and everything, but they were like not on the eggs. They were wrapped around each other. So I think one of the females might still have, be gravid. So I think just one of the females laid, but she had 15 eggs, and this is Maug to AAR line. So kind of excited to different stuff. Yeah, see that kind of outcross a little bit and get some, hopefully some different looks. Cause the male's really cool. He's kind of a bolder, like dark contrasty looking inland, which is kind of a cool look. So hopefully some of these babies will be neat looking. It's so hard with those, man.
It's been a couple of years since you produced them anyway. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I've still got, I think I have a reverse trio still from, a year and a half ago. Or maybe 2 years now, but yeah, they're looking really good. Like there's one that I'm like, oh, maybe I need to keep that one. It's like the other day it shed and it was just blue is blue. And I'm like, what is, and it's, I guess it doesn't always look like that, but maybe it was just,
a good day and
fresh shed, and it looked really nice. So I think I've still got some clutches from Woma pythons. They're definitely gravid. I wish they'd just lay the eggs, and then I think another pygmy is due to lay, and hopefully some spotted pythons. I got a clutch of Western stems and a clutch of children's. So if the spotteds and a clutch of pygmies in the incubator. So if the spotteds go, I get all four, and that's a nice deal. And then I got some new snakes this week, so that's exciting.
Fantastic 5, hey?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So they were a lot larger than I thought they were going to be. They're 2 years old. So I was able to import them out of Europe with no issues. So that was very nice. Maybe all this turmoil in the government is okay. They're not, not that anything was illegal or anything, but they're not. Yeah. But they got pulled in France for some reason. I'm not even sure why they went to France, from England to France, and then they inspected them there and delayed the shipment. So I was supposed to get them last week, and then they didn't come till Tuesday. So I was supposed to get them last Thursday, but then they arrived in the country on Thursday, and she didn't want to ship on Saturday or Friday for Saturday. So had to wait till Tuesday, but they were really nice. Really good looking. So I'm excited to work with this, whatever it is.
Right. Well, I mean, that's the cool part too. You haven't found them before and stuff, and to get ones that, it's that same phenotype. It's not a questionable thing. It's not,
right.
Because sometimes the European stuff, you can look a little skeptically, right? I think they like to post for fools occasionally, where it's like, oh yeah, it's, or take advantage of what they perceive to be our greed or avarice or stupidity or all of the above,
Right.
But I mean, that the fact that you found them, and it's like, oh, they look like this. That's perfect.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, they look just like they did in the wild for the most part. So it's exciting. Well, I guess things are going about as good as they can. Hopefully, I can get stuff hatched out and get them eating consistently and all that good stuff. The blackhead eggs are still looking good, so hopefully they'll go the distance. And I don't know, that was kind of a fun puzzle, like each year I'd get eggs and they'd have a different kind of failure or something. So finally it's like, okay, I think I've nailed it down. I think I know what, and sure enough, they laid a good clutch and she wrapped around them and all this good stuff, like good signs, things moving in the right direction. So at least I'm making improvements there. Sometimes you learn the hard way. I realized my air conditioner, was unplugged. Like the vent was the vent had unplugged from the back of the unit. It's one of those freestanding units, not a window unit. And so it was just basically blowing that hot air from the air conditioner into the room. And I go out there, I'm like, why is this room so hot? Like, I've never had it this hot, you know, this time of year. And finally I better check this thing out. And I look by, I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm an idiot, you know, like just stupid. So
recirculating hot air.
Yeah. And pumping out cold air as well. I'm like, I can feel it. It's cold air coming out of this thing, but I guess the hot air was more so than, you know, the exchange doesn't work so well if you don't vent it out to the side. And then I was worried, like, man, this, you know, fumes from the AC, that's not great either. So I was like, every time I go out to the reptile room, I just open the doors and, you know, air it out. And I'm like, what is going on here? So I'm an idiot sometimes, but what do you do?
Well, I think we all are. Yeah.
I'm sure nobody can relate to that, right? Everybody keeps perfectly. Yeah. Well, are we ready to do a little fighting? How's your season going? You got any stuff you're planning, or what are you looking forward to with your collection?
Yeah, nothing too crazy. I have probably should be on track for more Jamaican boas. All it looks, you know, those sort of clockwork, 2 years, you know, all those things look normal. Rhino stuff, they're building up and all that. So yeah, it's all good, but yeah, it runs later than you guys. So.
Get them a little later. Well, and I mean, those that was part of the puzzle with the black-headed pythons, is like, she would lay in February. So I'm like, I got to put the male in there in like September, or, you know, August or something. Like, they just get going soon. So yeah, it's kind of crazy. But yeah, you get clutches in February or March and you're already going, you know. So
absolutely.
Should be cool. But yeah, good times. I'm a little worried about the economy. When the economy's not great, people aren't buying a lot of snakes. So I hope I don't produce a ton of snakes and then have no, you know, no homes for them. I have room for them, but I just won't have, you know, buyers maybe. But hopefully things will go well. Hopefully somebody's making it rich off all the turmoil in the stock market. Wiser investors than myself. Now, I guess we'll see. Can't panic yet, right?
Right. Absolutely. No benefit to that. So.
Yeah, exactly. I have to keep telling myself that. Watching the NIH dismantle, like, okay, I can't panic yet. Yeah. Anyway. All right. Well, let's fight about something good here. So we're kind of starting a little bit of a theme. We'll see how this goes with next week's discussion. But this week I guess I was listening to, or I was talking to a friend, and he mentioned, you know, something that a potential, you know, somebody at a reptile show had said at his booth about, I've heard this snake does this or is not good because of this. You know, it was kind of like, oh, where'd you hear that? And it was a reptile podcast, you know, and it was bad information, and so, you know, do reptile podcasts have kind of a, should they be, I guess, responsible or have some sort of etiquette to not, you know, demean other projects or to, you know, speak badly? What are kind of the good things and bad things that can come from reptile podcasters? So that's kind of the topic for tonight. We'll discuss either side of that. So go ahead and flip a coin. Give it a call there.
Change it up. Call it heads.
Heads. You got it. You're on a roll.
Wow.
Yeah. Which side would you like to take? That they have a responsibility to put forth good information, or you say, they can do whatever they want?
So I think my natural predilection tends to say that there is an obligation to it. So I'm going to try and fight the other side. So let's see. So I'll say that they don't, you know, that they're just doing it for their own enjoyment. And that people should, you know, consume with care, I guess. But I will check you, and we can just chat through it. So.
Sure, of course. That's kind of how we work here. If you haven't figured it out yet, we try to see the both sides, and I think we could potentially argue both sides. So that's what it's supposed to be. So, all right. Well, as the winner, are you going to chuck me, or you want to go
Absolutely.
first? All right, of course. All right. Well, so yeah, I guess in that regard, if you're, I guess the main point is if you're spreading bad information, that's not good. That's not great regardless. You're not going to do yourself any favors, because anybody who knows about, the species you're talking about is going to think you're an idiot, So I would say kind of stick to your lane, talk about things you know about. Don't talk about things you have no experience with, or it's the whole, the snake laid next to me to size me up because it was trying to figure out if it could eat me, that kind of stuff, like those kind of rumors that keep going around. I was watching an old Steve Irwin episode, and just kind of an aside there. I guess when I was watching them for the first time, I never realized how much of that stuff is just absolutely staged. They've just pulled the snake out of a bag and threw it on a sand dune. And look at this giant mulga we found that's like 8 feet long and, the size of a pickle jar. Like, okay, that's not a wall.
We just happen to know that it eats jumbo rats.
Exactly. So I was like, oh man. And, finding a freshly hatched clutch of green tree python babies in a bush, like that you can reach and stuff. Like, okay, this might be a setup. I'm sure there's probably some stuff they found that was wild, and you could usually tell a little bit of a different behavior when they're dealing with those big, but how much it was like hammed up. Anyway, sorry to all my fellow Steve Irwin fans, but so what was my point there? Oh, he talked about how the snakes unhinge their jaws, and to swallow their prey. I'm like, really? Steve Irwin said they unhinge their jaws? Like, I mean, I get like it's kind of a, they have very flexible skulls, but there's no, I guess, what do you define unhinging as? They just can open their jaw really wide. They don't have a chin, so they can stretch it out. That kind of bad information just gets passed around. So anytime, then you're kind of like that know-it-all guy, though. Actually, snakes just open their mouth really wide. You sound like the weird nerd kid. Something. They're like, oh, thanks, bye. It's you don't want to go around correcting everybody, but sometimes it's important to do so. And I've seen some pretty fun little goofy arguments online, of course, where all wonderful goofy arguments occur about, things like, should they be called venomous or poisonous? And, those kind of discussions are can be entertaining, but also very frustrating. So I guess that's my first point. If you're going to be out there talking about information and people look to you as an expert because you've got a podcast, right? Anybody who has a podcast or can record a podcast is automatically an expert, right? Take things with a grain of salt, especially if you're listening, but they definitely, I'm arguing they have a responsibility, right? Yes. Yep. You have a responsibility to put out good information. If you don't know it, get it from your guest, get it from, another source. And I think too, that's kind of why this podcast was formed, was because I found myself yelling at my, phone or wherever it was playing from, yelling at my headphones, whatever you want to say, when they wouldn't challenge people on these bold claims that like sounded off. You're like, wait a second, follow up on that. What are they can't say that. That's not right. That kind of thing. So, and I guess, you can see things from different angles and different points of view, but sometimes just bad information is bad information, so put forward good information.
Yeah, absolutely. I think kind of the principal point for the sort of contrary side that jumps out to me, because again, I would definitely fall into your box. And as someone who consumes a lot of podcasts, I certainly have had that experience, and even, seen it change and grow over time. And so maybe that's part of why I'm willing to embrace this side of it, is as long, to me, the critical distinction is, are you well-intentioned and like trying to exude and promote passion as opposed to being cynical or, being focused on negativity or, problems with the hobby or drama or whatever. If you're well-intentioned, passionate, and you keep showing up, even if you have views that you yourself will regret, as history goes by, because who amongst us doesn't have that, where at least you say like, oh, I was actually kind of wrong about this, or I was taking the wrong tact or engaging it inappropriate, not the way that I would today. to me, that's really the number one thing. And honestly, that sort of drives how sustainable your effort is, right? And it's the passion that keeps you turning up. We've talked about it before, where it's like the average length of a number of episodes of a podcast is 6 to 7, something like that. So once someone goes past that point, well, they're more committed than the average person, than the 50th percentile in terms of. You even see cool podcasts where it's like, or from years ago, or it existed in this window. It's like COVID. There was the podcast boom and all those things. So I think if you're coming from an era, and even amongst folks that would fit into that box, right, where they would be led astray is if they sort of had a cynical view about a particular thing. So generally they're positive and promoting good things and saying, building excitement. It would be when, I don't like those things, and they sort of diminish what they're talking about because they're not interested in it, either by not engaging it or by promoting sort of negative stereotypes, and that's sort of what you're talking about. Was it's like, well, I don't work with those, so I haven't informed myself well enough to know that that's not actually the case. I'm just sort of promoting a negative stereotype because of that.
Right. Yeah. And I guess we don't run into that a lot on this podcast because we're not, interviewing people about different species they keep and things like that. There's plenty of those out there, and you can find all sorts of different genre and different species groups and things, which is cool. I mean, I love listening to species specific podcasts, but I also find myself kind of gravitating towards the things that I like and that I keep, or that I'm interested in and would maybe like to keep, but just can't, don't have the room or don't have
keep or find the means, or whatever it may be,
exactly. Yeah. So I guess that I think that's kind of speaks to Eric and Owen, where from the beginning they kind of said, we're going to have a positive attitude. We're going to, make sure we don't just talk trash on other people, and that we have that excitement and promote that excitement for lots of things. And I think that is contagious. I mean, as evidenced by Owen's collection and, like all the things that we see. And I think that goes for me too. When I hear a podcast about a certain species that I'm interested in, then I'm like, oh, that sounds doable. Oh, they're in the States, maybe I get some of those, like it's kind of a dangerous thing sometimes to listen to reptile podcasts, but yeah, I think, that's a good point, being positive and promoting that is probably one of the most important things you can do. And I think the ones that are negative and out there to trash talk and make enemies, they probably don't last very long. Like, it's hard to sustain something out of spite versus something out of passion. So.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, and the other part of it, admittedly, and this is more a point to you, I do think is speaking, as you maybe even said explicitly, speaking within your realm of experience and knowledge, and not just sort of passing on hearsay about, without at least framing it that way, right? This is actually maybe the critical distinction is, I think you can actually say things that are incorrect so long as you're presenting the context of your statement fairly, saying, I don't know anything personally. This is what I've heard, X. And if it's two people that are talking, both of whom are situated that way, it doesn't necessarily fix the potential problem of someone doing that and taking it as truth, but at least you're giving that context. You're not presenting it as though that's an expert opinion that's instead that's promulgating that idea. It's saying, I don't know anything about X, Y, or Z. Yeah. What I hear from people has created this sort of impression in me that this is the case. I know historically, right, there, it'll be especially things that are easy enough to pick on, be it chondros, chondro keepers, chondro localities, Alterna, gray banded king snakes and their localities, these sorts of things. A lot of the time, people who haven't engaged in that community really deeply have sort of this inch deep, mile wide appreciation for what that actually means, particularly in like the Alterna context, where it's like, they're saying all these road things or whatever, and it's like, well, if you actually took time to study Google Maps and understand what their ecological niche is and these sorts of things, you can see that it actually does make a difference. It's not arbitrary. They're not just It might not be worthy of recognition in any sort of scientific way, right? It's not that, this needs to be described as a different population, maybe even genetically maintained differently, whatever, right? Which is what that group would like. But if you looked at the map, you wouldn't just say, oh, it's one side of the road versus the other. It's not. If you engage so I guess in the same way of saying, like, are you engaging with the topic not only positively or at least with enthusiasm, but are you engaging with it honestly and seriously at the level that the true experts in that are engaging with it? Because if you're not, then you're not going to do a service to that conversation, because there's a deep conversation and you're only, you picked off the easy, name off the top and said, like, oh, this is what they're talking about. And it's like, well, no, not really. Yeah. So as long as they're bringing sort of the context and saying, oh, well, I take it, I haven't made that deep dive into alternative localities and things. So maybe there's something more to it, but just on a superficial level, it looks kind of silly.
Right. And I think that's true. There is a little bit of impetus on the listener also to
appreciate that's
appreciate.
Happening. Like, does it sound like someone who's deeply invested, or are they sort of casually disparaging it? Yeah, absolutely.
And think like, okay, if I'm this passionate about species X, maybe, and I feel like I know all this stuff. Maybe they also know all these stuff and they're not just, spouting roads for no reason. Yeah, exactly. I guess you see that a lot in a lot of different areas. I guess that Dunning-Kruger syndrome or whatever, where you have very little knowledge. So all of a sudden you think you're the expert and you don't realize how much there is to know and how much some of these folks probably forgotten, compared to what in that area, especially if it's not an area of your expertise or excitement. So, I think there is an impetus on the listener to do their due diligence as well and not just assume that everybody's an idiot but them. That's one of my favorite Homer Simpson quotes. Everybody's stupid but me.
Absolutely.
And, it is hard. I guess we all have that kind of personal bias, like, what we like and what we know and what we get excited about. And that's fair, but also recognize that everybody has that, everybody has something that they are very passionate about and excited about and probably very knowledgeable about as well. So, and that, if you've, and leave room for growth. If somebody's new and they're excited and, I was listening to a podcast and they were talking about a species of, rare species of gecko in the hobby, and they didn't know where it came from. And I'm like, oh, come on, guys, like at least know where this species you spent, $10,000 on a pair, where they came from, they probably did. They probably just left their mind. I know how that works too. I have plenty of things leave my mind in the moment, but, so I guess both sides, be a little patient with people too, especially if they're just excited about something. I actually had an example of that recently where I was listening to a podcast and they were talking about Oidura, and I was all excited. Oh, they've got these different species in the country. And so I went and looked on their page. And I'm like, oh, that doesn't look like what I expect it to look like, so I questioned, I'm like, are you sure that's that species? And he was really nice about it. He's like, well, here's a couple examples of ones that look similar to this. And, it's might have lost a little color because it's in captivity versus out in the wild and this and that and the other. And I'm like, oh, what a beautiful response. He didn't I know what I've got. Leave me alone, you idiot. Or, oh, well, this guy, he's been in it longer than me, so he probably knows better. So maybe I should just call him nothing, I think it goes both ways. Cause I was honestly asking, cause in my experience, I hadn't seen any like that, but my experience is also very limited. I saw them in a very limited part of their range, and they extend much further than that range. And looking just on Flickr or, Google images, I saw a lot more that looked similar to what the ones they had in captivity. So again, we don't know everything. And somebody in a position like that, probably very much more passionate if they're importing the species from Europe and things like that. So, cool.
Just bringing that humility, right? And that's a lesson for all of us all the time.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So, I think that functions both ways, for both arguments. So saying both would be well served by okay, well, am I approaching it with passion, an open mind, humility, those sorts of things. That's true for both.
For sure. And, I guess people always expect people are going to grow. I mean, if you listen to the first season of the NPR and you listen to the 16th season of NPR, they're going to be a little different. They're sure. Getting better at the podcasting thing. They're kind of have worked out which questions are they're easier to ask. And I think too, we think, oh, that's not how that interview should have gone, where sometimes they just had complete bombs dropped on them with guests where they before the podcast started, they said, I don't want to talk about this. And you're like, oh, that's why we had you on here. That's the whole reason we came here. So yeah, that's, have some understanding, behind the scenes that's sometimes how it goes. You sometimes have to really work hard to get the simplest of answers out of guests. And other times you can't even get them to shut up and they're just spouting nonsense and you have no control. And I think anybody that's podcasted more than 6 or 7 episodes probably knows that as well. It can just be a train wreck sometimes, and you just got to embrace it and move on, and say, well, There goes that one. What do you do? So
yeah, I mean, they're not all. That's part of the. I do think we have the advantage now that there is so much content that we can be more selective in terms.
Sure.
I know the old. Initially Reptile Radio thing, and we actually saw it, come to full fruition there, where it was like the Reptile Radio thing was initially, they were never going to skip a week because of the concern that once you miss that sort of schedule or rotation, or even, our thing, we've had this last 4 or 5, 6 episodes was on a calendar of saying we have a general date that we do it, but it's okay, this week we know is not going to work. So it's a pre-planned thing. But Reptile Radio, I think they did it every week, Tuesday, maybe. Initially, they had a date switch, just like NPR, but it was okay, it's this day. They did it every day for 2.5, 3 years, something like that. They say, oh, this. When they first started the show, right, the passion is so high that it was even when, what are we going to do when, whatever, Tuesday night is Christmas? And they're no, we're doing it anyway, and then 3 years later, that comes to be the case. And then they don't do it. And it was they were supposed to take a week off, and then that turned into 2 weeks. They came back for one and missed 3 more, and all this stuff. And it's I know, Eric and I talked a lot that having is, if you don't have a schedule, you can be irregular as long as there's a schedule. Yeah. But if there isn't, then it's really tough to just find and make the time to do it. And that's half the thing.
Yeah. Right. And I think too, when lives change, or with Chuck, his personal life changed, and it was just very difficult for him to find the time. And so, that happens. And, it's a little difficult because we love Chuck, and, it was fun to have him as a co-host, but that's, you just got to do what you got to do. And, his life and, what he was pursuing at the time was more important than doing a reptile podcast. And that's very fair. I can't, oh, come on, Chuck, just ignore that stuff and come chat.
I mean, although that reminds me, right? That's the same thing we were just talking about when we did the last show, right? Where it's I think I had presented it as sort of the bill of goods, if you want to take it as such, of reptile breeding projects, is that the consistency of showing up every day, keeping consistent conditions, all those things, stacking days, stacking months, stacking years is half the battle. Right. And it's the people who are really invested in keeping that consistency that we see do well. And the same is true with the podcast stuff.
Right. For sure. And I think too, I mean, it is a passion thing for us. We're not getting any monetary benefit out of this. I think, in a roundabout way, maybe you'll get more people listening and taking you seriously as a breeder as well. So they might buy your animals or things like that. But for the most part, we don't have any advertisers. We don't want to be beholden to anybody. If we miss a week, we don't want somebody, hey, you didn't peddle my products.
You got to
pay exactly. Sure. Pay that sponsorship back, kind of thing. So there is some freedom in that regard. But then you look at a podcast like Smartless, and they're making millions of dollars off their podcast. But I guess that's a whole different animal. But that's I guess my long way of saying, you get what you pay for, where most of the reptile podcasts out there don't cost a cent to listen to, and they just are happy that people are listening, you know.
Happy to be doing it. Yeah. And that's the thing.
Exactly.
And honestly, you know, I don't even have the sort of breeder incentive connection or whatever, you know, I'm not selling stuff, so that it's like being in a space of, to me, it's awesome to talk to you. It's awesome to talk about this stuff. And it gives me a context to reach out to Dr. Zach or Bob Zappalordi, to talk to Nipper, you know, all these sorts of things that it's like, maybe I wouldn't make time for in my, or have a, you know, a context, right? Have a reason that beyond just sort of wanting to talk to them or whatever. It's kind of gives us a free context to have those conversations, and it allows us to build in the time to do it. You know, so to me, that's really the enjoyment to me. And if anyone else gets anything from it, that's all the better.
For sure. Yeah. And I mean, I think too, our lives are getting more and more busy, and we're having less and less time for chats on the phone with reptile friends or, you know, or other friends, you know. So I think too, I find myself filling that gap with a podcast, because like you said, it's an excuse to chat about cool things with people you like, and you know, and meet new people. And I mean, we've gotten to know a lot of, I mean, Dustin Grahn is a great example of that. You know, we wouldn't have known him without hearing him on the podcast or bringing him on, you know,
hearing
him on NPR.
Us and saying, hey, you know, and then it turns into, you get actual relationships from it, you know?
Right. Yeah. And he's a great friend, you know. He's one of my better friends in the reptile hobby, you know, that kind of thing, all just from that kind of connection. And you guys, and, you know, all the folks from back in the NPR forum days and stuff. So, you know, lots of good things can come from doing a podcast. And I think too, like, it's nice too, maybe one of the responsibilities or one of the parts of this is that we can also put people out there that maybe people haven't heard of or don't know about, or have a different type of, you know, getting Joe Mendelson on here and having him talk about, you know, his research. Yeah. Who knows how many people have ever heard of him and how many cool things he's done and adventures he's had and things like that. You know, that's pretty cool. I don't know. It's fun to meet new people and to hear kind of their story and what's going on in their reptile brains, I guess, their brains thinking about reptiles. And
I mean, part of that too, right, is we're missing some of the context that we were raised on in terms of whether it be it books or Reptiles Magazine, Fauna Magazine, Reptile and Amphibian Hobbyist, the Vivarium, you know, these sorts of things that it's like, those, you know, eargerly anticipated. I know you just as much as I, where you standing by the mailbox, that sort of thing, going to the pet shop and, you know, looking through these things, the back issues and all that sort of stuff. That doesn't exist in the same way. And with all the social media stuff, it's so transient. That it's just like, if you're not explicitly looking at, you know, even before we got on, right, you're telling me a couple of different things I got to go check out. And it's like, well, I've just been busy for a week. If I don't then seek out those particular people, it's like it never happened. The form, at least, it would stack on itself. It would be impossible to miss, you know. And I remember, you know, the whole drama of, okay, I've got to go to work, and I'm going to go when I come home, I'm going to check out and see who said what and whatever. Now,
you have to catch up on the threads.
You can't do that now. No. You know, it's too overwhelming. So I think podcast is a venue to get back to sort of that long form discussion, or at least longer lasting. I mean, heck, the cardinal sin, you know, even more so than having a short running podcast, is the people. And I'm happy to say, if anyone wants, this could be a flight topic. I'm happy to, you know, maybe we'll talk to Nick about this, but anyone who does a podcast and puts in that time and effort and gets that time and effort from their guests, and then arbitrarily that information, just one day that archive is gone and those shows are no longer available, I will go to the mat on that. That won't be I see both sides fight. I'm ready to go. So, and there have been several where that's been the case, and it hasn't been even the host. It's been, it was, in our case, it would be if Eric just decided one day arbitrarily, the whole archive is gone. The record is gone. And that's what's happened to folks. And it's, Reptile Radio, they sort of did it to themselves, because we're going to put all of it on the Bush League Breeders' Club website. And then, that's not internet archived, because you had to be able to log in. And then, you know, one day you lose interest, stop doing it, eventually stop paying the bill. And it's gone.
Fortunately
for me, you know, the good news with the Apple podcast, iTunes or whatever, is that it at least used to just sort of download that stuff in the background. So I actually wound up having essentially all the Reptile radios because it had been auto downloaded onto the computer. So I have all these episodes that are otherwise gone, but there are plenty of podcasts, you know, Corrales Radio, Nick's show, Vin's show, onto this box of, I know those shows happened and I know there was cool stuff that I enjoyed, and now it's just gone.
Yeah, I guess, it's a very difficult thing too, because, you know, I find myself too, like, not being able to keep up with the current stuff. So I'm not going back and listening to stuff, you know, 10 years ago, unless there was really a cool, you know, like, oh, that was a cool episode, I got to listen to that one again. And there's a few that I've listened to several times, you know, that you go back to and listen. And that might be a fun topic to kind of bring up, like the Hall of Fame podcast episodes that you just really enjoy listening to. And I mean, that's all personal anyway. Like, you know, you get a different thing than maybe.
And even remembering how you heard it at the time, you know, or like it's taking you back, you know, nostalgia in that sense of like, oh, I was at this different place and I was keeping this stuff and I remember listening as I'm feeding out, whatever, you know, and this sort of stuff. So
exactly. And, you know, what you kind of learned or built on, sometimes we may even forget that. It just becomes a part of our background, you know, like, oh, I didn't come up with that. I heard it on a reptile podcast, you know, or I read it in Reptiles magazine or something, you know, it just becomes a part of your knowledge base in a lot of ways. So sometimes we take that for granted, you know, like what we heard or whatnot. But, you know, I guess, that's another question altogether. Like, how do you leave this as a legacy, or, you know, is it worth putting in the permanent record? Does the Library of Congress download every episode of a podcast? You know, like what's worth saving and archiving? You know, that's kind of a cool point. And what happens if is Eric archiving? You know, we ought to chat with him about that and find out where everything's being stored, or, you know, the physical form of each episode. That might be, you know, something that's worth putting in on the cloud somewhere, or, you know, where we all have access to or something. But crazy to think about that. It is nice though that we've kind of kept this train running for as long as we have, and I'm still enjoying it. It's still been a fun time. And
I mean, that's the thing. There's still so many shows that I want to do. You know, it's one thing to say, you know, there are shows that we want to do that don't make sense or can't happen, you know, or the people don't want to do them. There are others where it's like, no, well, or we haven't even asked yet, you know, or it's in my mind, but we haven't talked about it, or we've talked about it and they've said yes, but we haven't made it work and all that stuff. So, I mean, that's the other Simpsons, but, you know, got to stick to the script. Is it, you know, never fear, we have stories for years, you know, like that sort of deal. So I think actually there are, and the cool part about it is that it's not some constrained universe, right? That I'm sure there are someone maybe just starting today that 2 years from now be thrilling to talk to, you know? And I think part of, we've expanded our universe by trying to incorporate so much field herp talk so that like, that's that many more people. And I think in that space, honestly, there's so much more room for people to become experts within their own niche, be it, you know, their regional stuff or just somebody who gets super excited about Oedura or whatever it might be. Right.
Yeah. And also
it's easy enough to Nick Vine, right? You know, he moves to Australia, you know, and he's been keeping stuff and whatever, but it's like, okay, well, there's, you know, an up and coming guy where it's like, you don't have to be at this point keeping anything because it's all about, go make some stories and that'll be great to talk to, you know?
And what was funny is he had contacted me as a high school student because I'd put out a video of rock monitors in the wild. And he was really interested in rock monitors. He was doing a report in school. So he called me up and we interviewed me and stuff. And that had gone to kind of the back of my mind. I'd forgotten that, you know, and then, we were on a herp trip, you know, herp in Central Australia.
Absolutely.
And this 20-year-old, you know, or 22-year-old kid, with a bunch of 50-year-olds, as his mom put it, you know, out herping Australia. It's pretty cool. But we could, you know, have great conversations, and he was as passionate or more passionate, you know, than the rest of us. So it was really great. I really enjoy that. And also the other thing that kind of came to mind is having folks like Richard Ross on a podcast episode and having that interview with him, and having that in the permanent record of hearing him talk about his book.
Haven't been able to do it. I mean, that's the other part, or out of that, right? He and Keith formed this friendship, and so Keith's like, Richard Ross keeps texting me, he's sending pictures of stingrays or whatever, and it's just like
so cool
because of the podcast.
Yeah. So I think there's a lot of great things that can happen, when you have that passion, that attitude, and that I guess thought about your responsibility to keep the train running and to put good information out there and to get these legends on your podcast, because sometimes it's just a matter of asking them, nobody's asked them, like they're just a name on a dust jacket or something, like you don't think about, hey, let's get them on the podcast. So that's kind of the exciting thing. And it's a lot of the fun of doing these things is the people you meet and the associations you make. And that's, that's something that's very cool. So I guess we do benefit much more than monetarily in that regard.
I think that's where it is.
Yeah, for sure. And you have folks, throughout the country and throughout the world that you can maybe call on if you're in their neighborhood, and they'll go out herping with you and, have some good times. Or folks that I've just listened to on podcasts and looked them up or called them up or messaged them, like,
sure.
We're going to be visiting one of those on our upcoming trip. So just cool people, that you hear about on these podcasts. So that have like the same interests you do. That's really a fun way to do this. So I don't know that we've even scratched the surface with this, but I think we've put some good ideas out there. Any kind of final thoughts or other topics we didn't bring up?
I don't think so. I think this is a good primer for what we'll record next week. So Matthew Wayne, not another reptile podcast, I think.
Yeah.
Kind of fits very much in this vein of just, beautiful guy who's doing a great thing and you can tell just emanates passion and things. You're going to go on there. I was on there previously. Ellen, Eric, Nipper's been on there. So Lucas, all these folks and things. And just even that's part of the fun too, is like that gives them it's a different person asking questions differently in such a way that like even people that I know really well, I'm hearing them have say things, have opinions, express themselves in ways that they don't normally when I engage them, because I engage in a certain way. So I think that's a beauty to it too. It's just bringing their own, not trying to mimic what someone else is doing, or, and heck, maybe the style looks the same. I know Dr. Zach, right, has mentioned that in terms of the colubrid and colubroid. I want to do NPR, but for colubrids. But, making it their own and asking questions in such a way, and that's the whole thing, right? That's the other cardinal sin of podcasting is not actually having a conversation. It's instead trying to get to the end rather than just following the course of the conversation, so that you're yada-yadaing someone, that's on my trips or whatever. And it's like, okay, no, just have a real conversation. Because you're not me having that conversation, I'll hear, I'm sure when I listen to you with Matthew that I'm going to hear you say stuff that we haven't talked about because he's asking the question.
Yeah. And I mean, his perspective and his journey is a little different than any of ours, and, that kind of thing. But we also have a lot of commonalities and excitement about the same kind of things. So that really helps you see things from other points of view. And like you said, answer questions and bring out new information that maybe we don't know about each other, haven't heard before. So definitely exciting thing. And it's also fun to go on other podcasts. And, sometimes I feel like, okay, if you've listened to me before, you've heard my story, I don't want to repeat that again, but sometimes that brings up new memories too, the way they ask it. Sure. You tell a story about your childhood that you've forgotten about or hadn't told in previous recordings. That's
absolutely happened to me.
Right. So I think this is a fun medium for sure. And, I'm glad we have this. Again, you kind of get what you pay for. You gotta, there is some, less thorough or less researched or whatever, however you want to say it, or just kind of the passing one that does their 5 or 6 episodes and then bails, it's always frustrating because there's some good ones that have started and just haven't got off the ground. I mean, I'm an example of that. I started one and it just didn't go very far because I didn't make a schedule. I didn't, it was kind of more work and effort. This one's a little, I don't necessarily have to do all such preparation. I don't have to read a paper or something to prepare for it. So, but I did enjoy doing that, and I'm glad somebody took the reins and is doing a much better job than I did with that idea, of discussing scientific literature and things. And there's no shortage of scientific literature. I mean, that's the thing. It's like you can't even scratch the surface with a weekly podcast or so yeah, good stuff. But I don't know. I've really enjoyed doing this with you, and I'm really glad that you agreed to do this because you've definitely been brought in a different perspective and also a different, people you're encountering and bringing on the podcast. It's been fantastic. So thank you for being a great co-host.
For putting it out. Yeah. Where it's just, that was the thing. I was listening to you and Chuck, and I love that. It's one of these things where there are a few exceptions. The episodes that I'm super excited about, generally speaking, I don't listen to stuff that we're putting out. So it's great to me to have stuff to listen to.
Right.
It's been really good. And I'm just thankful that folks agree to come on, that you're here every week, always excited to do it. And I think we're, the future is bright and so much cool stuff to talk about and get excited about and stuff. So.
For sure. Nice. Well, any cool things in the last few weeks that you've come across?
So I've been, as I say, just kind of busy. So I don't know that I have the sort of usual thing ready to go. I will say that I have seen a lot of the stuff that Rob Christian's been doing, and that's been really cool. They just had, I should look it up for the form of the thing. They just had someone on the podcast that I really enjoyed.
I was listening to them as well. I mean, I really like their podcast. They do a good job with that one.
Let me see. This is super compelling radio. For sure. So I feel free to go ahead. I will.
Yeah. No,
that's what I was thinking of.
I listened to, I got back into Ryan Dumas's podcast, Let's Talk Turtles. And they had an episode that kind of caught my eye, or actually a friend told me about it, about Russian tortoises. And the fact that there's all these different subspecies of Russian tortoise, and that might be a reason why they're not as commonly bred in captivity, is because they may be coming in from different areas and they're not compatible. They're not
the same.
Yeah. And they know it, but we don't. We're missing those subtle cues. So that was pretty cool. I really like Ryan and his ideas. We need to get him back on here soon. He's got a lot of good ideas for Fight Club topics, but I enjoy his, and like we said, Matthew's Not Another Reptile podcast. I'm excited to go on this week, and looks like Frank Colachico is making the rounds, and I listened to a couple of his interviews on a couple different. I love the enthusiasm, man. Especially field herping enthusiasm. Yeah. And just the diversity of stuff that he's talking about or interested in and has experience with. It's really fun to hear about far off places that you maybe hadn't considered. I'd never considered herping Oman as a possibility, but he made it sound like, it's very safe. You just go there and do it. It's like, oh, okay. And hearing about the people where he had, they have a friend there that just says, here, take my truck, and gives him like the keys to this brand new truck to go out herping. It's like, man, those are some cool people. I need more friends like that. But
Well, and then we would be remiss not to mention, so last episode we had talked to Joe of the Colubrid Corruption podcast. And if you have interest in colubrids, he just has all these awesome guests on, right? Your local neighbor Joel Reap was on there a couple months back. That was good. Dr. Kevin Messenger, right? A fascinating story. He's a professional herpetologist working at a university in China. can't get more fascinating than that. The Asian rat snakes are a hugely interesting group, whether you're passionate about them or not. So yeah, I suppose that's been most of the stuff I've been taking in at this point. And then obviously Blaine Mazzetti, Mazzetti's Fine Snakes, that YouTube channel. I did just see a couple of those. It's getting towards the good season for them, turning stuff up. And I just, again, what are the attractants to me? Obviously, there's a common through line, and it's his enthusiasm, perpetual enthusiasm, even for seeing sort of the same stuff. Or he's not a huge crotalus guy, but, the Ruber were starting to come out, and, watching that episode. And, he's even excited for him. It's like, I haven't seen one that looks like this, or this is the board that usually has them, and this stuff. Yeah. So just the enthusiasm and excitement's always good.
That's cool. Yeah. On the Reptile Talk podcast with Rob and who does he do that with?
Jeremy.
Jeremy. Yeah, that's right. They had Johnny Felicity on there, the Shingleback man. Yeah. So yeah, that was one that I enjoyed that they did recently. That's good stuff. And then Ryan and Nick talking about their Indo trip.
Check it out.
Yeah. It's we'll maybe have to get them on to see to have them talk about
stories.
Yeah, exactly. Or kind of talk about that aspect of herping where it's more of a guided tour where the guys run and find it and climb up the tree and bring it down and have you photograph it. It seemed like that was kind of like it was very hard herping, and they're not climbing a 30-foot tree to catch a tree monitor, so it's kind of interesting. Like you wouldn't see them otherwise. So I think, in that case, it's probably worth doing that, because to see them in the wild, is worth, having somebody show you them maybe, and maybe you spot one. I don't know, but
that's interesting. Yeah. I'd be curious. Yeah.
Yep. But, so good stuff. I saw a really nice photo of a Glebo palma, black palmed rock monitor by Rob Valentic. Is that how you say it?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, such an amazing photographer. But yeah, it's crazy to see something like that in a nice photograph like that. And Chris Smith also saw one. I don't know if they were together. I'll have to ask Chris. But yeah, he sent me a photo of one that he got, and it's just like close up, right on this rock. Beautiful pose. That's
amazing.
Nice looking lizard. So yeah, we know how shy they can be.
Yeah.
Yeah. You're going to see
all too well
friendly Dutch girl before you see a Glebo. All right. Anyway, on that note, we'll thank Eric and Owen and NPR and we'll catch you again next time for Reptile Fight Club.